If there's one place in Formula One where you don't want to get off to a slow start with a new team, it's Red Bull. So what on earth is going on with Pierre Gasly? He's been promoted from Toro Rosso and he's had a real struggle so far this season. I've got Jack Benyon and Ed Straw with me to try and work out what's going on, and perhaps the more nerve-wracking question is to work out what happens next. Ed, you've followed this one quite closely. You've watched Gasly trackside a lot, you've spoken to team members and to Pierre himself. What isn't clicking? Because this isn't a case of a guy who's just sixth every weekend at the back of the leading cars. You know, Pierre is falling into the midfield now, isn't he?
Well, he was lapped by Max Verstappen in Austria, having actually passed him initially on the opening lap at turn 3. So yeah, it's not working for Gasly. I think at heart, you know, Gasly is a quick racing driver. I'm not necessarily saying he's Max Verstappen quick, because few are, but he's certainly not as far. He's basically on average in qualifying just over half a second off if you compare like for like and make it a fair comparison. That makes it the worst teammate comparison in the whole field in terms of average time. So yeah, I think fundamentally it comes down to an incompatibility between Gasly's natural driving style and what the car demands, and ultimately it is Gasly's job to adapt. By and large, he's quite an attacking driver. He's been braking fairly late. Quite often this has created a problem over the season where he's braking late, trying to do get the turn-in done later, more lock-on, and as soon as you put more lock-on, when you start feeding in the power, you've got the car isn't rotated as much, it's harder to get the power down, and he's having the rear step out. So I almost feel like Gasly, that exuberant, aggressive driving style he has, which actually worked really well for most of last year at Toro Rosso, is working against him at Red Bull, but it is his job to adapt to that, and unfortunately he hasn't been. So the question I've got is, does he have the breadth of the breadth of skills and the mindset to actually adapt properly? Because I'm sure he'll have been trying, but he's obviously not quite clicked with what he needs to do and what needs to happen. Tough person to race against, Max Verstappen, but as it stands, it's not working. And I think when you're 9 races in and it's still not working, that's a really, really worrying sign.
Jack, Red Bull are famously ruthless with their drivers, not afraid to make mid-season switches in either of the two teams they have on the F1 grid. Ed just said there, we're 9 races in, and for a team like Red Bull, that's potentially too long to have not got on top of it yet. Do you think they should give him more time, though?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I think any driver coming into that team alongside Max Verstappen needs to be adaptable, because there's only one man that car is going to be designed for, and one man that's going to be sort of optimised for. It's always going to be Max Verstappen, isn't it, for the foreseeable future, for as long as he's there. So whoever comes in alongside him really needs to be able to adapt quickly, and Pierre has shown himself, as you said, to not be able to do that, quick enough. So it's an interesting one. I think there's a bit of context around this. I think there's a lot of pressure on Pierre to finish well, because Honda are obviously discussing their future involvement in Formula One at a board level, so it's a very serious time for them. They need good results. I think we've done many stories on Autosport.com about the importance of Max Verstappen's win in Austria, but also there's pressure there for Pierre to finish well as well. And also on the sidelines, we've got Esteban Ocon and Fernando Alonso putting a lot of pressure on the current crop of drivers, not just Pierre Gasly, for extra seats. So already the silly season's kicking off. We're already seeing some real interest next year and some serious conversations. Feels a little bit early, but I think we get to this point every year, don't we, where we're surprised every year how early the silly season kicks off. But it's not just Pierre, and I think there's a string of drivers who are going to be, under the spotlight because of Ocon and Alonso being on the sideline. So that they're all adding additional pressure. In answer to your question, at the minute, yes, I think they should. I think they should give him a season, based on the fact that, as well as it's difficult to make that change mid-season, but I don't think Daniel Kvyat is the right person to bring in the middle of the season. I think if they're going to bring him in, it should be next year, and they should give him a proper pre-season to learn the car and adapt. We've seen Daniel be thrown into difficult situations before, and he struggled to deal with that. So I think that would be detrimental towards him and unfair based on all the work that he's done at Ferrari and coming back into Toro Rosso as well.
It's a good point, actually, Ed, about the wider driver market and the fact that this may not just be an internal Red Bull issue in terms of how they move their drivers around. There are external forces potentially that are going to be at work here as well. Now, in a way, asking if they should give Gasly more time is a pretty redundant question with Red Bull, because ultimately, if they're going to make the change, it could be brutal and it could be at any minute. So the key question really is, do we think they will give him time?
I suspect they'll give him to the end of the season. I think while the point that Jack makes about the pressure on Honda, while they've got Verstappen there, the peak results are taking care of themselves, and they're not really in a championship fight at this stage. So that perhaps helps Gasly. And I think in terms of, like you say, that wider landscape, I'd agree that putting Daniil Kvyat into that seat mid-season is not really an option. Kvyat's doing a really good job, and he's showing much greater mental fortitude and consistency than he showed before. But they have to let him see out the season, and then they can decide if he's a contender. And then there are other stopgap measures, shall we say. You mentioned Ocon, who, if Mercedes don't use him, could find himself available. Nico Hülkenberg's out of contract. There were some stories linking him to that seat in place to Gasly. Gasly was fairly dismissive of those, but ultimately Gasly doesn't have any say in that. And I think, if you're looking for a stopgap, Hülkenberg could be a great option while they're waiting for the next Red Bull cab off the rank to come along, if they don't think Kvyat is right. So yeah, I think the situation is reasonably favourable for Gasly in terms of getting that run to the end of the season. But what's absolutely clear is if he continues on this trajectory, that's not good enough. He doesn't need to be matching Max Verstappen, but he needs to be there. In Austria, he made a winning car into a midfield car, unfortunately. And it is a shame, because Gasly is a quick racing driver. He did some really great things with Toro Rosso, fantastic in Japan, in Super Formula, GP2 champion. So he's no mug, and he's up against a tremendously challenging driver in Verstappen. But I just want to see him making that breakthrough. And it may be that the breakthrough comes, he dials it back a bit, because he could just be trying too hard when he really needs to dial it back, which is almost the hardest thing to do. But I think there's no question on the current trajectory, it's not going to work for him at Red Bull. So something has to change. And if it doesn't change, he'll make it to the end of the season, perhaps, and you never know, he might turn it round. But I think Red Bull will already be thinking about alternatives. And I think if they had a fully cooked, if you want to call it that, driver at Toro Rosso, let's say if a Carlos Sainz was sat there, they might well think about it. But right now, yeah, the landscape isn't quite right. The Red Bull Junior scheme isn't quite as packed as it should be below him. So that'll probably let Gasly have a chance to make it work. But 9 races in, it's not great. And I just think that at heart, is he a driver able to adapt his style to make it work? I hope he is. Good guy, quick driver. I would have expected him, if he can get things right with the car, to have given Verstappen even something to think about on a few occasions. But it's just been, it's been bad.
They've shown a lot of faith in Gasly in his junior single-seater career and all through his career, really. And he has faced adversity in many of the championships that he's competed in, and Red Bull have stuck by him that whole time. So I think there's enough faith there from Red Bull that they'll see him out to the end of the season and give him that chance. And we've often seen him, again, in his junior single-seater career, come on strong in the second half of the season. So Red Bull will be looking for that now. And I think, if Gasly's behind the scenes, he'll be lobbying quite heavily that he's going to have a good second half of the season, that he should be given the chance to compete. But he's not even matched his best result from Toro Rosso the year before yet in the current Red Bull. So he had 4th in Bahrain in 2018 with Toro Rosso. So to be that far away from what he was doing in the Toro Rosso last year is really worrying, and he really does need to have a good second half of the season.
But we should remember he had that long winless streak in Formula 1 3.5 and when he first went into GP2. So he has sometimes been a little bit slow getting into things, and let's hope that's what's happening, because we want to see drivers doing well, we want to see them showing their ability. And so I think, provided Red Bull do let him run to the end of the season, which I think they will, he has got every chance to make this work.